Hello, climbers, and welcome to Season 4 of Climbing Mount CMMC. Hello, climbers, and welcome back to another episode of Climbing Mount CMMC, the podcast. My name is Kaleigh Floyd, and this is Guerra. And today, what we're going to talk about is onions. But more specifically, we're going to talk about NIST 800-171 controls that from the surface, when preparing for CMMC, just seem like a nice little sentence that they added in there, but there's a lot of layers to them underneath that. So let's get into this because we've got a few things to cover that I'm quite excited to hear your perspectives on this. So us as Axiom, we became level 2 certified ourselves, but we also, as an MSP, take clients through this. So we do have to implement this multiple times with multiple different environments. So it is an interesting perspective to see, Bobby, your opinion on the layers underneath certain controls, and also maybe even if it depends on the environment, how difficult it is as well.
Yeah. Well, I mean, some of these controls, it's like 1 or 2 out of the 110, right? And you're just like, yeah. And they might not even have many assessment objectives. And you're just thinking, oh, this should be easy.
Right.
And some of them are just very sinister.
Well, let's get in to the very first one, which is yearly self-assessments. Now, would you explain to the people in the back that might not know a little bit about testing to a CMMC level 2 certification as well, and then go into the controls specifically?
Yeah, it's a combination. This one's a combination between the DFAR requirement that you have to yearly self-attest about where you're at, and they're expecting you to do that. So that's not specifically called out. But then you also have to do the review of your controls, right? So that is in the controls where you have to do that. And so because of that, kind of combining the two, you're going to do a real assessment of your organization once a year. Yeah, because that's in 32 CFR, right? It says you got to do that, keep that information for 6 years. So the Department of Justice, if they come sniffing around, they got the goods on you to be able to say whether or not you phoned it in. So that self-assessment process, it takes time depending on the level that you want to review it at. And then if you think about it as a managed service provider, right? So if you're a managed service provider supporting your client, are you going to do that? Is your client going to do that? Are they going to assess themselves? Are you going to assess them about the controls you do? Are you going to have a C3PO do it? Like that requirement is there, but I think sometimes people think about, let's get people through the assessment and get them done. But you don't think about, okay, hopefully after you have your level 2, and you're riding off to the sunset, are you going to do a little loop-to-loop and come back around and say, hi, it's me again.
Right.
Let's go back through and review this stuff all over again.
Right. And how much can you expect your client or that organization that was seeking certification before that couldn't really do that for themselves before to be able to do a self-assessment properly later on? I think that's kind of bizarre.
Yeah, I mean, out of the clients that we have that we're moving through the CMMC practice, I think maybe one might have the skill set because they happen to have a CCA on staff.
Yeah.
And you're thinking, well, if they have a CCA, why would they hire you, Bobby? Because CCAs don't necessarily know how to build a whole,
freaking container.
UCC high tenant
Yeah.
and have the maintenance and process. Just because you have the knowledge and you can assess it doesn't mean that you can do it or build it.
Oh, yeah. Just because I can say the word GCC doesn't mean my container's going to be built.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. So for those of you guys who might not have caught this part of what Bobby was explaining of like the two sides of these self-assessments, when you get your wonderful certification, CMMC level 2 certification, and you're done, you're not done. And that is because you have to self-attest as well to this once a year. So every year when you come around your assessment time of when you had your assessment, you're going to have to reevaluate all of this stuff, right? And so that is a requirement, and everybody does have to do this. And then every 3 years, you get reassessed holistically by the C3PO again. I want to talk about another item that we wanted to highlight specifically that also is yearly, which is risk reviews. and
Right.
talking about risks. So can you explain that part of it as well?
Well, a managed service provider, so that's us, right? The services that we're providing to the client, those types of activities, a self-assessment and a risk review, you might go, oh, we could do that in an hour, right? We could just knock that out real quick. There are certain times where that risk register and your risk review process based on certain things could help you in passing your assessment. Just because they may have some questions about how you handle some things or do some stuff, and the risk review provides additional insight for those types of things. So it's not something to just phone in. Like, you really need to pay attention.
Right.
The risk review process isn't exclusive to your container. It's one of the controls that is more uniquely enterprise. What do I mean by that? It calls out that the risk review that you have to do has to deal with the organizational, but basically it's like you have to look at things that put a risk to the organization's health and well-being, and it doesn't have to necessarily be things that are
Mm,
in your enclave,
right.
right? So you want to look at the risks that have pressure to the health and well-being of that organization, because if the organization goes down and you have those contracts, you can't continue to maintain those
Hmm.
because you're out of business,
Hmm.
right? And those types of situations don't necessarily have to be because your GCC container went down. It could be that you lost some key contracts and you're going to go out of business, and these other contracts are now going to go default because you don't have. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
So
it does.
those risks don't necessarily have to be specific things that are in there, and they want to see that you're looking at it holistically and
Hmm.
not just from a specific technology that might be involved in your tenant.
Right.
So that a good assessor is going to look at those risk reviews and want to see more of an enterprise perspective to those types of things, because those are important,
Right.
if that makes sense.
It does.
And so as an MSP, someone's going to have to do that. If you're the MSP, is that going to be you? And those aren't going to just be something that's 30 minutes to do. It's going to take some planning. You're going to have stuff detailed out. You have to
Right.
understand those concepts. So that requires a risk concept and understanding, what are you going to do? The OWASP stands for Open Worldwide Application Security Project. But basically, it's just a methodology you can use to kind of rate risk and help
Hmm.
you with the review process, having experience and understanding how to do that. That's the
Right.
methodology that we use for us, for ours. Everybody's different in how they might do it. It isn't prescriptive in nature as far as in, how NIST is. They leave it to your interpretation about how you would want to do that risk review process. There's different ways to do it. People that have like CISSP certifications would be very familiar with that process because it's covered very much during that material of the test.
Right.
And so having that type of background is very helpful when you're doing those types of reviews. But suffice it to say, those are going to take time, and you've got to think about, is that in the budget that you're charging that client monthly to support that? Is that going to be a separate charge that the client knew or did not know that they were going to have to pay yearly? Would they be very happy about that separate charge if you decide to charge them for that? Those
Yeah.
are all great questions coming to a company near you if you fall under that category.
Well, I have to ask too, this goes into context of what I was talking about at the beginning of this episode, which is we also have different sizes and different types of companies that we walk
Mhm.
through this. So, like, are these yearly processes going to take much longer for a company that is larger than one that is on the smaller side?
Well, I think it just determines how you see the value of that risk review.
Mhm.
When I'm going to be honest, as I always try to be, when I first heard about doing this, I'm like, this is stupid. Okay. I'm like, I don't want to do this. This is just more time. Like, everything's so time consuming. Can't there be something easy? It's like, you just kind of want to pout because everything's just a challenge when you're dealing with CMMC, and this is no different.
Yeah.
But as Adam, who has his CISSP and trained through the risk review process, and I've come more from an operational perspective, as he kind of went through and explained and trained me about it, because that wasn't my focus as I've come through the industry and grown, I really started to appreciate the perspectives operationally. Like, I now start to see more threats in areas, and it starts to make more sense to me. And I'm excited about when we do our risk review processes, and we're really into it. You start to see the value in it,
Mm.
about helping maintain the health and well-being of the organization. So I would hope that organizations, as they get into this, they might see it as just a step to move through, that they're frustrated. But over time, it could be something that could bring value, especially if your leadership team's really taking it seriously and they're looking at those threats
Yeah.
and trying to plan around those. Because those types of things could come and bushwhack you
Yeah.
as a company if you're not thinking about it. Um, Like, for example, you might have part of your risk review might be that 80% of your business comes from 2 clients.
Mm-hmm.
You need to understand that potential risk. What would happen? What would you do if you lost those? Would you not be able to function and complete your contracts? Would you be held default? Could they come after you? What do you have insurance around those types of things? Like those are things that you kind of need to think about. And there's lots and lots of things around that. Maybe you chose not to have cyber insurance inside your company,
Right.
which I think is crazy talk, but maybe you decided not to do that. But that should be in your risk review that you decided not to do that. It could be that you're utilizing some specific products or tools. Those tools could have some risks about being compromised. And so as you start to think about those and talk about those, it starts making you operationally start thinking about risks and how you might be able to mitigate them, because that's the intention, is trying to help you put some things in place to help mitigate those risks.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to shout out somebody because I feel like this is a very true thought in my mind, and I think in many MSPs that might be listening to this episode's mind when they're going to hear these different layers to things, is how many hours and things that might take them or their team to do. And just like you're saying, Bobby, just there's a huge risk as well for MSPs to lose money if they're not properly tracking this or
Mhm.
understanding what it's going to take. And it made me think. I went and I looked for this comment on LinkedIn in one of our most recent memes that we posted, which was from Isabel Rivera, she's awesome, and we've talked to her multiple times at events and whatnot. But she said, if actual dedicated CMMC consultants and MSPs charged hourly, the bill would be insane. Going into an assessment next month, and we have been living at a client's office charging low, as this is the first go for us. It's
Mm,
been well over 1,600 hours with all
mm.
hands on deck on the MSP compliance side, not even
Know that
including
feeling.
client work hours. The prep work
Yeah.
is heavy. I just think that's like I love her honesty about that, and it's so true. And I mean, I'm sure Bobby, you have felt that as well. It's
Yes.
just it's insane. You really
You
don't think about
There's the theory of CMMC, and then there's the freaking practice of CMMC. The
it.
2 are stark differences. One
Quite
is,
different.
I'm gonna talk about what it feels to get punched in the face. The other is a straight smack. And that's what she just experienced.
Yeah.
She just described it, and we went through it too. I
Yeah.
mean, there isn't anyone that I've known that hasn't gone through that and not experienced that punch. And you're gonna get it multiple times through different angles, and maybe this person was more cloud, but now you're gonna do a physical infrastructure. Guess what? You're gonna get punched
Touch
in the
my
face
face with
again.
all day. So
Every one of those is just a unique experience that you're gonna have to experience, and you can't theorize your way through that.
like
You're prepared for it, you have the plans, the strategies,
right.
but s some it's gotta be first at some point,
Yeah.
right? So,
Yeah.
and when you're gonna do that, CMMC has a high penalty that
Mhm.
they're gonna make you pay when you go through it, just because, the controls have so many layers to it, which is what we're talking about.
Exactly. Yeah. Let's talk about another one which I feel like is a big punch in the face for sure, is change management.
Ugh, yeah.
You want to go into talking about that and the implementation of that one?
Well, there are different facets about it, right?
Yeah.
First off, you gotta figure out a way to meet it. Okay, so what does that mean? So are you going to meet it on the client side, right, Kaylee? So the client has change control processes they need to do. It's their tenant, perhaps, that you're supporting. But you're an MSP. Can you never change anything? Do you have to ask the client for permission to change things on their side, right? Your agreement might say that otherwise.
Yeah.
You've got to think about this. You've got to think about, how are you going to handle that? Are you going to push a lot of the changes through maintenance? So
Mhm.
therefore you're dodging some of the change control. And there's some wisdom about that, right?
Mhm.
So a lot of it goes back to the old adage, you make your bed that you have to sleep in. So
Yeah.
you can set some of the challenges and the bars you need to jump over. If you're setting the bars at knee high, then it's going to be an easy jump. But if you're writing your policies to where you're having to bring a pole to the party, then that's a different conversation.
Yeah.
And so the change management process for an MSP can be very difficult to work through, because you've got to sit down and think about how you're going to connect to them. What's going to be a change? What if you're initiating a change on their side? Could they veto what you're trying to do? Well, your contract says you have to support the client. If they're saying, well, I don't think you should, can you continue to support the client? If they're telling you no, you can't make this change in order for you to operate, and you're like, but I won't be able to support you correctly if I can't, right? So you've got to think about that. And you might even want to think about how you have that in your agreement when you sign up with that client. And so change management can be a sticking point there. It can also be a huge blessing. It can help you track what's going on, especially if you're starting to get larger as an MSP and you're starting to grow. It can be a huge blessing for you to track how you can make sure you don't screw your client up.
Right.
And making sure that you're managing the process of working with them and vice versa. So it is a double-edged sword, and you have to really know how to wield it. You just don't walk into a crowd and just start swinging that thing. It's going to end up badly for you.
Yeah. And you're talking about the client side and your side, but
Mhm.
if you're an MSP and you're bringing or you're onboarding clients onto this like CMMC journey, and you're having to create this for them, that design or creation, like, are you doing that for your clients, and how
Right.
do you do that, and how does it potentially connect to your system? How do they get
Yeah,
that
so
info?
true.
Like, it's like the technical side of creating that as well, which I know some people choose to, like how you were saying previously, dodge certain aspects of that because they don't want to deal with it. Of course, the Axiom way, we did not. We went full speed ahead,
Right.
right on
We
through.
gotta give you the biggest hug possible.
Gotta
But like I've talked with some MSPs, buddies of mine, um, that, just I deeply love and admire that have helped me in my journey. Like some of the things that they do is I've seen some uh use an open source or some type of product you can set up in SharePoint that you could host at the clients that allows them to do the change control process. You could use approvals, which is what we decided to do. We have a process where we stand up approvals and their tenant,
Mhm.
so they go through it. And if we have to make a change, we would then communicate with them that would require it, and they would have to initiate it from that side. That's the process we sort of went through to go through it. And then we also were smart and try to push things through the maintenance and processes and change, because if you're going to make a change to somebody's tenant, it doesn't necessarily mean it has to be a change control, especially if it's part of a maintenance process that you're going through, a
Yeah.
review, a baseline change, right? The requirement says you got to review the baseline. And if you have to go through, do you have to do a change control for that? You don't necessarily have to. That could be part of the maintenance process you go through. So it's authorized for you to do those changes as
Yep.
long as you have the scope properly defined. So that's again kind of where that goes through about where you want to do that. That's what made sense to us. But guess what? As we go to grow and get larger, that may not make sense to us when we're double in size, maybe triple in size.
Mhm.
Who knows? So you've got to think about, this is why yearly reviews are really important about how you are as a company, because you might have to evolve as you work with your clients, right?
So true.
So a solution today when you're an MSP that size may not be the right solution tomorrow when you start to get a larger. And if you're in the CMMC space and you're supporting clients and you're doing a good job, you're going to grow.
Yeah. Yeah, because we need you.
Yeah,
Like,
we
oh
need
my
you.
gosh. I mean, it's like, let's see, January was when it started, and in the last town hall, what did they say? Like somewhere between upper 200s that have gotten CMMC level 2 certified so far.
Yeah,
And
probably a quarter to half of those are implementers.
yeah, yeah,
So
that's insane. Like thinking
mhm.
about that, they were wanting in the first year, like when 48 CFR dropped and the phased rollout began, they were wanting, what did they want? Like 80,000?
No, I think in the
No, they
first
didn't
year, I
want.
think it was like
It was
1,800 or
like,
16
yeah, well,
1,700 or something like that.
I'll put it on the
Yeah,
screen.
I could be totally off. Well, in theory, we're supposed to be in our bonus innings, right? So kind of like we're we're kind of in the pregame before November when that kicks off the real process.
Mhm.
So their hope is that the infrastructure is going to start to build up, and then it's going to have a synergetic like multiplier over time.
Yeah.
That's not quite necessarily proven to be the case. We're seeing indicators that could be the case, but I mean, we're here in August. October now, and we're only at 300. So hope to God it starts multiplying a little faster than that as we come into the end of next year, because it could be a bit challenging
Yeah.
for us to hit those numbers they're hoping to hit.
Yeah.
And I don't know, we'll see.
Yeah. And I mean, I can count like on one hand the type of MSP that we are that is also CMMC level 2
Right.
certified that's in the space. I mean, it's crazy, crazy,
Well,
crazy.
you look at Summit 7, they've done 50,
They've done 50
right?
out of
So
the
that's like
200 and something.
yeah, that's a huge
That's
percentage.
a huge
And if
percentage.
you, but if you think about it, like how many of those aren't implementers, right? So let's take that number and split it by a quarter. So then you take that and say, now that's the 50 of that. Like they're knocking out like a large margin of the people that have done. I mean, way to go, Summit 7,
That is
you
so
know?
true. That's so
And
true.
then we come in with our, we got one done. They're like, yay.
Woohoo!
Now we got more that are coming through the pipe, but
Yeah.
like I guess the difference to us, they've been around for a lot of years. We've only been around for a few, and a lot of the clients that we have, we've been moving um, from them starting their journey,
Like
like
in
either late
January.
last year or just the beginning of this year
Yeah.
that are starting, and so it's all about moving them briskly and efficiently through that process. And
Yeah.
so, we're going to have quite a few hitting in Q1 of next year that are going to be dropping.
You talked about this. You actually kind of hinted at it when we were talking about change management. But another thing that we wanted to discuss that has a lot of layers underneath it is the baseline of a workstation requirement.
Yeah, that's in the CM domain again. So you
Yeah.
got the change manager, which is the CM domain, and then the baseline is also going to be in your CM.
Is it easy to paint yourself in a corner here?
It really is.
Yeah.
So go back in time, right? So you're back in time, and this was more written around the idea of a ghost image. I don't even know if you know what ghost is, but it was a product that was magical back in the day, where you could
Like a
you could
blackberry?
like a BlackBerry, yeah. It's probably around that time. I think it was, as Ghost was
Did I
pretty
nail it?
pretty often used.
Wow.
It was a great product, and what it would do is it would take a snapshot of the system, and it would create this one file. Lab people used to love to do it all the time, because you could just re-image the computer back to this baseline build, and it would have the OS and everything in it all. It's like, just puts it exactly the same. And so you could roll out like Windows 10 or Windows 11, and every one of them is going to be the same thing. And so it's really great. But nowadays, it's a mobile workforce. People are popping around different places, and to have a golden image that blows onto the system and isn't exactly the same is just not as realistic, unless you're using some higher end enterprise tools and some other things that you're trying to do.
Yeah.
So, how do you address that then? So you have to figure out how you're going to use a baseline process through other means. For us, we went through and had a build process utilizing Intune and a baseline process of checking. And then, okay, how do you review it every year that the baseline needs to be updated or adjusted? How do you do that? How do you maintain that? If you have multiple clients, how are you going to then adjust those baselines for all of them? Because if you're going to make that change, is that going to have a larger impact to how they operate? It could, based on what changes you're going to make. So, like, those all take time. But if all you're focused on is getting new clients through the pipe, and you're not thinking about maintaining the existing clientele you have, you could have a problem as a managed service provider, right?
Mm.
Or if you're an organization that doesn't have an MSP, and you're just you, and all you focus on is doing your business, which that's what you want to do, right? That's how you make money. But
Right.
you're not focusing on those other activities, which can kind of be on the down low. You're not paying attention, and then you go to do your review, and you just sort of phone it in. And then a year or two later, something happens. The DOG shows up, and they're like, well, you didn't do your risk review. You didn't check your baselines. You weren't doing these things. You're supposed to be doing it. You said you were when you did your yearly self-attestation. You lied to us. We have a problem with that.
Mhm.
And you can have real problems. So you can't phone these things in. You really have to do it.
Yeah, that's so true. But I mean, that you bring up an excellent point of they just want to do their job, and this is an extra this is an extra item, that you might not have on the forefront of your brain, and your mind this whole
And
time. So,
and you really wanna think there's really in a system, in my opinion, there's, like, 2 different kind of things. Other people might have different perspectives, but you have your system baseline, which is gonna be around how things are in general configured, like, what are the based applications that are gonna be installed? What are the base functions and capabilities they're gonna have on that system?
mhm.
But then you're gonna have your security baselines, right? So
Yeah.
those are gonna be, the lockdown policies. SMB1 is not enabled. You just block by default on inbound and outbound traffic. I mean, those
Mhm.
are all kinds of examples of your security baselines, but both of those need to be reviewed so that your system is safe and secure. And you have to prove that you're doing that at least yearly, that you're reviewing that process.
Exactly.
And it can be challenging if you're not used to doing those, and especially as an MSP, how are you going to do that scale?
Was just about to bring that up as a topic because, if you're an MSP listening to this, doing these types of activities for a client, how many people do you have going through the CMMC process? All of a sudden, these tasks become quite a lot of items if
It
you're
can
looking
be,
at it.
yeah.
So,
And that's part of the reason why freaking CMMC is so expensive is
yeah.
because CMMC is more of a people person problem than a technology person problem, because you gotta have the people that are qualified to make decisions that are helping stay on top of these types of things. You can't just there isn't a system that I'm aware of that just takes care of all this stuff for you magically, and you're just like, "Oh."
Yeah.
You gotta have people that are getting in the trenches and getting it done. It
Hmm.
it sort of punts you back to some of the basics of things that you were having to do, because compliance is requiring
Mm.
that level of validation.
I love how you called it a people person problem. I am a people person of CMMC. That's
People person.
that's a new item that people can put in their LinkedIn bio to let us know that they've been listening to the podcast. People person of CMMC. Oh, I just had to
You
point
heard it here first,
I
folks.
just had to point that out. We go really in depth here and we talk about people person.
I'm doing my best. I'm doing my best. Dropping nuggets.
It's so
Enjoy it.
good. No, okay, we have two more. One, and we're gonna touch on just a little bit because we actually had a whole episode about this, which is vulnerability scanning and management. So you want to give the listeners or the audience that's watching an example of what you mean by the layers of that, and then they can
Yeah.
watch the full episode if they really want to see us break down those layers.
Yeah, I mean, Patch Tuesday, it's the bane of anybody's existence that really cares about patch management, because it's the quintessential we're doing great, and then Patch Tuesday comes out and you went from 120 vulnerabilities to 650, and you're
Hmm.
just like, okay, here we go again. You start plucking away at trying to reduce them down, and those can be done
Yeah.
through automated processes. Those might have to be done through manual processes. It might be a combination of both. It's just a continued process you have to do. It's very challenging. It's so challenging. We did a specific episode about it where we talked about. So definitely check that one out.
Yes, yes. And as we're saying all of this, I think it's great to remember the umbrella that all of this sits under, which is we all have to prove that this is happening as well.
Right.
So let us remember and understand that that is part of the difficulty that also Bobby is talking about when going through each of these is not only can you just do the vulnerability scanning or go through those for your clients and whatnot, but also the evidence piece is a whole nother aspect of CMMC that you have to gather. And I don't know of an MSP that would give their client access to their ticketing system to pull up their vulnerability scans so they can do it themselves. I don't know if there are MSPs out there that would do
Right.
that, but I would not recommend allowing your client access to just pull that stuff up in an assessment. I feel like that is just asking to get, you know, crap messed up and things changed and things shown that you probably don't want to an assessor. Like, who knows what they're going to do. So I think it's very important to remember when talking about these things as the MSP, are you able to prove this stuff as well in front of an assessor? right?
Yeah, I guess maybe what you're trying to get at is if the MSP decided they didn't want to be very present for the assessment. Is that kind of what you're referring to?
Yeah,
And that
how could
they,
a
yeah,
yeah. Does the client just have access to their vulnerability
right,
scanning software?
not realistically,
They
yeah,
pulled it
yeah.
up.
Or
Right?
or be able to speak about it intelligently. I've seen some MSPs are like, we'll just have tons and tons of screenshots, and the assessment organization can just take a look at it and be like, cool.
Mhm.
Um,
There's
so
there I know of an assessor. Hi, Tom. Hi, Tom Conkle, that's listening to this right now. That would be like, I want to see more than a screenshot.
a
I
screenshot,
want to
yeah.
see it tested live. He said that to me so many times when I've
Yeah,
mentioned
and
that.
it's funny, I've seen assessors that I've talked with C3PO just recently this week, and they said that if you can take screenshots that have validated timestamps on it within 7 days of the assessment, that would be considered authoritative evidence.
Wow.
So in theory, you could take a lot of screenshots of activities and present that,
Mhm.
and that could help cut down your assessment time.
Mhm.
Okay, I could buy that, but not all assessors are going to. Not all C3POs are going to accept that. So you better know how they're going to feel about it.
So does that mean that you just wish on a daisy that you get that assessment?
No, you better not.
No?
Well, I mean, if you go through all the effort to take these screenshots and then they're like, that's cool, but I don't give a crap. You just wasted 2 days, 3 days of time of just sitting there crushing down screenshots and uploading it, putting it there, and they just disregarded it.
They're like, no, thank you. Yeah, try
So,
again.
yeah, you want to have that information clearly defined before you walk in.
Yeah.
That would be a bad day.
Okay. So the last thing I want to talk about, well, there it's just one word, but there I think this has probably one of the most layers to it, especially if you're thinking about an MSP being involved in your environment, which is tools.
Mm.
Tools. Um, now, tools, it doesn't just say that in a NIST 800-171 control. It does not
No.
just say tools. That's it. So can you explain what we mean by that? Because there are a few layers to how tools are involved in this process. I mean, we kind of talked about it even with like vulnerability scanning and things like that. I mean, there are certain tools that need to happen, that need to be in the environment to be able to do those things, and be able to operate those things. So
Yeah, there are controls that bring those types of activities into scope, but it's really around the scoping guide and the cap is where the tools kind of get
yes, yeah,
really brought in, as
yep,
well as the DFAR.
yep. The DFARS
What do I
clause.
mean by that? So, like the tools and what type of data do they have access to is going to be probably addressed to some extent in the DFAR requirements around 32 CFR about what those tools are capable of doing. I mean, there's a whole episode you can focus on those. Suffice it to say, in phase one, a good
Of a
assessor
CMMC assessment, is that what you're talking
yeah,
about?
and your CMMC assessment,
Mhm,
the assessor is going to want to know what tools you have and what purposes they're fulfilling, and whether or not you can validate whether CUI is available to go into those tools.
mhm,
And then, okay, if it's not, do those tools provide some type of security function, right? Are they providing the patching? Are they blocking and providing firewall services? Are they providing encryption? Are they doing identity management? Are they providing multi-factor authentication? Whatever those tools are providing, application allow listing, for example, SIM tools, these tools are going to provide functions of security, and they want to classify what they are.
yep,
And so in that phase one process, they are going to be very intimately involved with trying to understand what their purpose is in the scope of the assessment and what they're bringing to the table.
mhm,
And then they will also potentially be assessed to some extent in what they're doing.
mhm,
So, for example, if you have a SIM tool, do you have separation of duties in the tool in order for, does everybody in your company have the ability to delete the SIM data? And they can create accounts and they can do whatever they want in the tenant.
mhm,
If they can, then you can't really prove separation of duties. That person has full godlike rights to hack the Pentagon,
Yeah.
not really, but you know what I mean?
Well,
Hack the whole system and hide their identity of how they did it because they can delete all the logs.
No, but Bobby, I talked with my team and they said that they wouldn't do that. So
They
is that
wouldn't do that,
okay?
right? We have trained them
Is it
not
yeah.
to do that.
Is that okay?
That's
Does
not
it
no,
okay.
it is not okay. You have to prove that you have true separation of duties and not just separation of counts.
Mm-hmm.
That's not the same thing. It's talking about individuals. So individuals need to have those separations. There are exceptions if you have smaller organizations that just don't have the people power to do it. But, you know, if you're a 50-person company and you could easily do the separation of duties and you're just being lazy, the assessor is going to have a real problem with that. So,
Mm-hmm.
so then that comes down to just understanding the tools and how they work and how you function and work in those. And those just are super sinister because you're like, oh, we're meeting all these controls and we're doing, I'm checking these things off. I'm doing so good. But then you haven't thought about what they bring to the table and the liability that's involved as you're utilizing those and really understanding and being able to. Because when the assessor starts turning the heat on and you haven't really thought about that and the lights just like on you and they're like, what about this? What about that? And you're like, you know, and you're like, I don't know.
Yeah.
Paper or plastic? I don't know.
Yeah.
You know, tomato.
And
You know,
yes, and it's so this is a part I want to zero in on something specific that I've heard so many people talk about or bring up to me in conversation that is so confusing. And I want to get your perspective on this. Is they so you know, let's take the tool is not meant to pull CUI data. Like that's not what it's intended for. What it's intended for is to scan something or to detect something else. It doesn't even, it's not even supposed to mess with the CUI data or even touch it at all. But it does pull information. Okay. But that's not the whole, that's not the purpose is not for it to interact with CUI. It's to interact with this other data over here. So, but, but then the assessor comes to you and they ask, but could it pull CUI? Like, could you use it to pull CUI data? And do you say yes? Do you
right.
say no, but we don't feel like doing that? What do you say to that assessor?
Well, that's a great point because it could be that that assessor knows that tool better than you.
I sure hope they don't. Gosh.
Right? And you're like, oh, no, I'm using Screen Connect and it's not possible for you to transfer the CUI. And you're like, dude, have you ever heard of Backstage on Screen Connect? File transfers? Like,
You
you
can
haven't
transfer
told me how
files
you
on
address that. You know, you're like, how do you address that?
Yeah.
And then you're like, oh, well, I use Sentinel-1. You're like, well, does it have the capability for sandboxing? Well, yeah. Okay, well, that's grabbing data. You don't have a way of determining. Like, there's different ways. I'm using this RMM, and we have it locked down. Okay, but could it transfer data? Well, yeah, it could, you know. Well, does the company that has access to that cloud system, do they have access to your tenant? Well, yeah. So that company could transfer data. Well, they won't, but
But they
they
could.
could,
Yeah.
you know, and like what mechanisms do you have to make sure that they don't? Because this data is of a sensitive nature that pinky promises don't count. We need insurances
Yeah.
and assessors look at that with typically a skeptical eye. Some might be more accommodating around it, but in general, most aren't.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you have to know how to address that and be able to justify and validate that those things are placed. Like for example, Huntress now has allowed an option to where you can check a box that prevents the transferring. So then you would be prepared to show that box has been enabled and have some type of mechanism to validate that it's always in place or
Yeah.
be alerted if it were ever to be changed. You know, like you've got to be thinking about the assessor's perspective about how they might look at that and be
So
prepared
true.
to answer those types of questions.
And see, and this is where, well, you know, here are the layers, so much of them already that you could just see just with us talking about this, but also an MSP that knows CMMC and knows what that means and brings to the table with their own tools. Because Huntress, like the example that you're saying, you're turning off an ability of Huntress that actually a lot of MSPs like in the commercial side. They're actually limiting the power of their product to be able to be in the system, you know? And so And that's the kind of stuff that you have to do as an MSP with your tools and be able to be aware of and how to do that. And like, this is going again under that umbrella of proving it. It's like, if you are not an MSP that's prepared to do that or knows what box to check so that that is not allowed and it's not just a pinky promise, you're setting your clients up for failure, you
Mhm.
know?
Yep.
Um,
Very sinister.
very,
You don't yeah.
very
It's on the
bad.
down low. You wouldn't know it.
Yeah, very bad stuff. Any other things that you can think of that you wanna add that we didn't talk about?
I think bonus points would be application allow listing. It's pretty sinister.
Ah,
That's a tough one.
mhm.
I think a lot of people don't think about that. FIPS is another master pain in the butt. We could do a whole discussion about that. How do you prove it? The strategy of how you attack it.
Yeah,
Printing with FIPS, without FIPS. Oh my gosh, there's all kinds of ways to think about that. There's just some of these things have, like you said, that layer um, to them,
yeah,
and when you have a client that's like, I need to do this, and you're like, oh, how could we attack that? What layers could I put in place?
yeah.
What mechanisms could I do to allow us to accomplish that for the client?
But yes, but you see, and that is what a good MSP will do. It's not just, "Okay, we will do that for you," because you need to be aware sometimes of what the client is asking of you, and if that is crossing a line that is no
Yeah.
bueno,
It
right?
it is it is really tough. We come from our commercial side where we're used to saying yes to the client in general about most things that they ask
You
for,
wanna make them
even if
happy.
yeah, because you want to make them happy. But it could be that you make them happy until they fail their assessment, and then they're not happy again, right?
They're
So
very
it's
upset
like,
with you.
great, I made you happy just long enough to then punch me in the face again
Yeah.
when you fail the assessment, and now it's going to really cost you some money. Um,
Yep.
and and so you've got to be prepared. I think that would be another bonus point is you've got to be prepared to know how to have those discussions proactively with the client to communicate with them. Look, your people are going to get a little upset. They've come from an environment where they've been able to ride roughshod and do whatever the heck they want, whenever the heck they want. They don't have
Yep.
to think or plan, and now they're gonna have to. You're gonna have to do change control. You're gonna have to have approval processes to go through things. You're gonna have to have allow listing and blocking of things. You're gonna have to prevent these types. So guess what the water cooler conversation is gonna be all about? How the MSP effed you over, right? How this new policy is not loved. Management needs to understand that's coming. It's going to happen. You can't stop it. I don't care how good of an MSP you are or person who understands these technologies and tries to give everybody the biggest hug. There's going to be grumbling when you go to implement those types of things, especially if you've rode roughshod over it. People are going to be like, hey, we've got 5 new users starting today and we've got the workstation set up. We got to do it. And you're like, well, unless you could figure out how to do some background checks and training right now, that ain't happening. But those are the types of realities that have to be dealt with for the client. You've got to plan as you're talking with the client and understand those realities and know how to guide them through that process. And I would say that that's another big, huge down low, especially as an MSP. You've got to be prepared for your clients to get grumpy and not happy with how you're doing it. And so having those conversations proactively and explaining to them how users might have a problem with it. We need leader buy-in. We're going to try to soften this blow as much as possible. There's no way you can't feel that especially if you have a larger organization. Well, sadly, Kaleigh has lost power, so she got booted from the call. So we'll go ahead and end it on my own. If you're watching us from Spotify or Apple, feel free to hit, the ratings on those, hit like on those. If you're watching us through YouTube, feel free to hit the subscribe button so we can get updates on it. And also make sure to provide comments, forward it to friends, let people know about what we're trying to do. We're really trying to get awareness around CMMC, especially for people working with MSPs around those challenges. And it's something we love to do, and we like hearing feedback from you as well. So please do so. Give us some feedback on how you think. If you have topics or things you'd like us to do, we'd like to know about it as well. So as always, everybody, remember to keep on climbing, and we'll see you next time. So long.
Make sure to follow us on LinkedIn and YouTube to stay up to date on the latest CMMC news. We hope you guys enjoyed today's episode and listen out for the next one. But until then, keep on climbing.